kick off the first talk. Big thank you to Will for helping make this happen, and everyone else in the room who make this happen by showing up as well. We appreciate it, and we're excited to see all your faces. But to kick things off, Mike and I are going to be talking about optimizing for agents for front-end experimentation. So I'm Ben Odisho. I am an engineer with the order cart experience team, which is working on modernizing our checkout cart on Grainger.com right now. And
I'm Mike Bosch. I'm also a software engineer here at Grainger. I work within the order domain with Ben. I'm currently rotated into Ben's team, so we've been working on this together for the last month or two.
Yeah, we both met as part of the Grainger as a dojo team, which is like a team that works around Grainger's organization, helping people learn new technologies as they come up and helping them improve their engineering experience by giving them feedback on what they're working on, feedback on how they can improve, and just really investing inside of the engineering knowledge themselves. And I really like this project that we've been working on, of working with AI agents and experimenting with them, because it feels like a spiritual successor of that initiative. It feels like we're really taking a step back and looking at AI and going, hey, this is something that's pervasive inside of the industry that everyone is starting to use. How can we come together and make sure that it's getting used well, make sure that it's getting used in a way that is effective and friendly to engineers, that it's not taking people's jobs, it's making them easier, making them more friendly.
Kind of to add on to what Ben was saying, part of our experimentation is trying to figure out where AI is useful. How is it useful? Because once you dig into something, you tend to get surprised. Like assumptions you made, some of them you thought were going to play out were wrong, and some of the things that you didn't even realize ended up helping you out.
So one of our first exploration areas as we started experimenting was looking at our pairing products, looking at our ways of working, how we're coming together and pairing in a world where AI is everywhere.
So Grainger, we have things called standard defaults. These are things that all teams are supposed to do. And one of them is pairing. And so we typically pair with two engineers, and they pick up a story, and one of them anchors that goes to the story. We were getting feedback from the engineers that as we incorporated AI more into our ways of working, that it wasn't as satisfying. It also didn't feel as effective because they would be, they didn't feel that they were as engaged during the pairing process. And so we kind of took that feedback and had some discussions and decided we were going to try a different tact.
Yeah, this is very personal to me because I've done a lot of pairing in my life, and the best part of pair programming is when you're sitting with somebody, you're bouncing ideas back and forth, and you're really throwing together something cool and you're doing the engineering part, right? You're coming together and doing creative problem solving, which is seeing that the customer has an issue and working your way through your code base to make sure that issue is resolved. But the worst parts of pair programming are sitting there blocking out your brain for 10 minutes and then coming back and realizing, oh, I have no idea what's going on. Someone just typed in a bunch of code and I don't know what's happening, but it'd be weird to say, hey, can you say the last 10 minutes worth of things over again? And AI sort of exacerbated that problem, because what would happen is people would interact with these LLMs. They'd find, oh, I've written a bunch of code and now I'm processing the code as the person who wrote the prompt. But the person I'm pairing with is also sort of trying to catch up while also catching up on the prompt that we wrote as well. So we wanted to invest a little bit in the quality of it.
So what we ended up finding was, what we tried was how with a pair, each pair takes their own story. They interact, they work with each other on planning out how it's going to work, making sure that their understanding of the story is correct, how they want to approach it. And then they can go off and work on each of their stories individually. And then they come back and review on prompts, on code output, that sort of thing like you normally would. But for the prompting process, the research process, all of that, the AI ends up acting as we were pairing. And we found that worked really well on standard stories. We found that it didn't work as well on unique stories, like We had one for dealing with networking. That one was a very unique kind of piece of work for our team, and that did not work as well. Also, when we had a new engineer on board with the team, doing it this way did not work as well. Also, so we now have like criteria that we did this new pairing practice when it's a regular, more typical story, and for these more bespoke stories, we tend to do our more traditional pairing.
Yeah, because when you're working with that, my favorite way of referring to it is you're basically playing this long game of Family Feud, right? Where you're giving it a prompt and it's doing its best to guess what the most common answer for that situation is. Which in traditional cases is usually the right answer because you're solving a solved problem, right? But the problem comes when you're doing the experimental stuff, doing the weird stuff where you're breaking the web and you're doing the discovery work that no one's done before. Where if you ask a computer to do that, it might give you a right answer or it might give you a weird answer because you're asking a weird question. So really breaking it up so that we could invest in the planning, the beginning process, and emphasize the good parts of pair programming. It's been helpful. It's felt really good from an engineering perspective.
Yeah. Had really good feedback from the engineers on the team with this approach.
So another part of this is investing in repeatable commands. So cutting out the toil of engineering, where we found that spending time working on skills and spending time working on the parts of the engineering process and the parts of prompting that we were writing over and over again was super helpful. If we kept sitting down and telling the prompt to, hey, like before you hop into this answer, ask us questions, or hey, before you start trying to work towards a solution, slow down and give us tests that we can use over and over again, or before you give us a solution, make sure those tests are passing. Adding things like that into our agent skills or adding them to our agent underneath that really helps speed up the process of going from I'm talking to this abstract black box to I'm now working with something that reflects my own thought process.
One of the side benefits of as we've built out a more comprehensive suite of skills is that it's forced us to document the things that we do as a team. Like what's the right way to do things, or what's the way that we intend to do those things. We use them a lot for operational work as well. So we'll get into that one on the next slide, I think, too, a little bit more detail. But yeah, I really like the fact that it forces us to write out like this is our team's way of operating.
Yeah, I mentioned that we both met on the Dojo team, which is a team that goes around and helps other teams sort of improve their processes. And one of the most common ways we'd start out those group engagements is through doing definition of ready and definition of done evaluations, which is sitting down with people and saying, okay, we all have this column on our board that says done, and we all have this column on the board that says ready for development. Does everyone agree on what that means? Like if 14 people are working inside of the same code base, and 3 of them are saying done means writing tests, 3 of them are saying done means the code just passes locally, and 3 of them are saying that the code has passed QA and whatever other checks we have, is it really done? So normalizing that and getting it immortalized in the repo also gave us opportunities where the LLM Copilot or whatever we were using would step back and say, hey, before I stop working on this, I'm going to ask you, did you consider accessibility? Did you consider internationalization? Did you consider these other things that you're prioritizing as a team? And it's making sure that we're really investing in our processes the way that we say we are.
And that we're consistent as well.
Yeah.
Because humans will sometimes forget, or we may not consider, like, I may forget that I need to double check or my monitor is going to be affected by this new feature. We build this in as part of our checklist of our skill for like a story process, and we know it's going to get asked and evaluated as part of that work.
Yeah. If I had a penny for every time I've accidentally committed a print statement or a console log, it wouldn't be working right now. So some of the cool tools that we've been using as part of this experimentation is a grill me skill that we found, that what it'll do is you'll use the grill me skill and it'll go into a back and forth where it'll say, hey, here is the problem you're trying to solve. Here's the question I have about it. Can you answer that question before I move on to the next step? And we'll do that over and over again. Keep asking you questions. to make sure that the prompt you gave it really encapsulates the problem that you're trying to solve for.
It's basically, the funny thing is the skill's really simple. It's like 3 or 4 lines long. It's like exhaustively interrogating it, basically. And the idea is you want it to get to a point where there's no more ambiguity. Like if it has to make a decision, it's going to ask you. It's not going to make an assumption, which they're very good at. So,
yeah, which is something like we try to work out through the pair programming process, and usually it works, but like another issue there is that 2 people working on the same piece of code together both are coming at it with the same context, which is great when you're coming at it as a context of being a programmer and trying to solve a problem. But sometimes having that context makes it hard to make an assumption that you wouldn't have made because of your background. So this helps get those assumptions out. And then plan mode is the equivalent of grill me and Windsurf. So there's a bunch of other different variations of this because I think it's a good solution to a good problem. Yeah, what's up?
Taking questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, do you guys have like a team-wide repository of your agent skills or your MD files, or do you just commit them right into the repos? And then, like, for that process, do you have any review process where like the devs are kind of reviewing each other's MDs and
so we have a Granger-wide one for a skills repo that teams can utilize and evaluate and pull in if they want to. For us, on our team, we also commit them, or the ones that we use on a daily basis, we commit into the repo. And then we usually, right now, I wouldn't say we're at a stage where we're formally reviewing like the skills beforehand. It's usually like we're still new enough that we tend to commit them and then review, like we're going to broadcast it into the team Slack or whatnot, or discuss it at stand-up in our parking lot. So. I already went to the next one. So, yeah. So one of the other areas that we've found a really high amount of value out of for this is tool creation. So as an example, like one of the challenges on our team that created a lot of poor developer ergonomics or experience was for us to test against real data. We would have to do all these contortions we have to move cookies around from when we log into one internal site to our local host. We would have a few other things we have to do, and Ben and I have been talking about like, isn't there a way we could like manage these cookies a little better? There's extensions out there that copy and paste them and stuff, but we were looking for something a little bit more streamlined. And we both at times worked on Chrome extensions, but they're not like it's not something we do every day. And so we had this idea, but if we had wanted to try to justify taking days to go and work on this, it would have been probably a little bit hard to justify. But we sat down for a couple of hours and just, kind of the equivalent of vibe coding, just went back and forth with the tool as we worked through this, and ended up building a Chrome extension along with making changes to our project for how we run our app locally, so that we basically removed that the toil of that down to 0. So this Chrome extension, when it's activated, copies cookies around the way we need it to automatically when we load off of our QA side, and then as long as it automatically provisions local certificates and all this stuff when we start up our app. So,
something I kept coming back to, and before I've adopted AI in my processes, there's an engineer that we used to work with who's, one of his mottos was like, if your team had a magic wand, what would you change or what could you create? And a lot of times when I'd ask myself that question when working with an app, the answer would be, I wish I had a tool that would tell me this. Or I wish I just had like some genie in a bottle that could do this for me. And Copilot sort of became that for me, where I could tell it, I don't really care if this works well, I just have a question and I need an answer. And the only way I could get that answer is by having some specific logger, having some specific tool that I don't really have time to make. I don't have 3 days to sit down and create. And it's perfect for those types of problems where you don't really care about the quality of the tool. You just need a tool. You just need a hammer to fix your problem, so that you can get to a place where you can push up the quality code that you want to make. So you can get to a place where you really understand how your code is working and move forward with it.
A nice thing, if it hadn't worked, or we couldn't have got into it working, so I think we went through like 10 different iterations on this thing in that afternoon. If it hadn't worked, you know, it was a couple of hours. But now that it's worked, we'll end up easily saving that amount of time over the lifetime of it. And if we continue to use it, we'll start to polish it up a little bit to make you know, smooth out the rough edges a little bit more.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest light bulbs I've had in my engineering career is getting comfortable with the idea of just burning things down. I wrote a bunch of code. That doesn't mean that code's right. That doesn't mean I need to keep the code. We can delete it, and we can use Git to get back to it if we need. I think that's something to keep in mind with AI. The Copilot generated doesn't mean it's right, but it also doesn't mean you gotta keep it. If you don't like it, if you don't like the answer it gave, just erase it all and do it yourself, or break up the problem in a different way.
So I've got a question.
What's up?
How are you guys sharing your internal tools across like teams and other developers? Or do you kind of do bespoke tools and then you guys just talk about it in the break room and you're like, oh, okay. How's that going?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more to break room approach right now, because these tools aren't like they're made funky, right? They're just made to solve the problem that we have. So what we were doing with the authentication tool that we were talking about, one of our approaches with that was, okay, we're going to make it for ourselves. If it works for us, we're going to tell a couple people who we know have the same problem about it. They can take it, use it themselves, see if they have some problems, and then we can get into that sort of product manager workflow of, we see it's working for a couple other people, let's expand that lens a little bit more and see if this is actually a problem other people have. Because the beauty of this is you could share it if it's a problem that a lot of people have, but it doesn't have to be. If it's just a problem you have and you can knock it out in an hour and cut out 10 days of work over a year, it might be worth doing.
Have you thought about like a shared hub, like an engineering tools hub?
We do have an internal tool for that's been getting built out and has like a plugin structure and stuff like that for certain kinds of things. Like for this particular example, it would be harder to implement for that, but for other tasks, like we have a full plugin system for that. So
We've been intentionally allowing some sprawl because the rate of change is so fast. So like it feels a little bit like definitely someone will want some shared tooling, but kind of by design. So
yeah, it can be difficult to figure out where to put the guardrails on and where not to, you know. And we'll get some things right, we'll get some things wrong. You know? I think that was
It's
the
right. I should have used a different color. That's okay. The last thing that we ended up experimenting with that we really enjoyed was using automated review tools. A big example of this that you all might have used is in GitHub. If you make a PR and you add Copilot as a reviewer to the PR, it'll give you feedback on the PR that you wrote.
And then in addition, we have a set of skills that we've been starting to build for different kinds of reviews. So like as we complete our story, you know, we have like a staff level review is what it's called, and it tends to look at more architectural impacts of the changes you're making, and then more like code cleanliness is like the next stage, and then we've got like a security review that's the next stage of that review process. And we found that having these different lenses on it, we find different things. If we had just one review process, it wouldn't capture the same kinds of problems. We had one the other day where none of our like local skills caught up, but then Copilot flagged a problem that could have caused an outage for us because it looks at it from a different context. So like this multi-layered approach we found to be super effective within our team.
And sort of the two sides of that I like to emphasize are, one, the psychological safety side. If you have a little Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder that you can turn to and ask questions about the code that you just wrote, you can sometimes push that code up more confidently. And here at Grainger, we do one of our sensible defaults that we tackle is chunk-based development, where we try to do our commits in small chunks and constantly push them up to main, so that way we know that if something breaks, it's easy to roll back that small issue, or if a problem comes up, the problem is very contained in a small piece of information. So having something to check your work and just say, hey, I looked through all of this and here's the weird questions I have, here's the weird questions I don't have about it. It's nice. And also, like Mike mentioned, just getting a different perspective. I write a lot, but that's because I think I'm right a lot. And a lot of the biggest problems in my life have come from me thinking I'm right when I'm not, which is a lot. So having something that can go through my code and look at it and say, hey, you made this big decision here. That's actually a weird decision that I don't understand because I'm looking at it from an agnostic point of view. It's useful.
And the last kind of bullet point I'll touch on here is where it says it's probably wrong, that's okay. You will find that a lot of your reviews they'll produce things that are false positives, and that's it's okay to ignore. The idea is putting things in front of you that you can evaluate and determine whether or not it's meaningful in your work.
Yeah. And I think the big spirit of this that connects to some of the other things we've been talking about too is it's really putting you back in the role of the engineer, right? You were sitting there doing the creative problem solving, thinking through these, and it's giving you questions. Your job as an engineer is to read those questions, give those questions weight, and decide, is this true or not for my application? It's okay to say no. It's okay for it to be wrong as long as it's making you think and ask those questions.
Yeah. And then, like one other area, last thing we'll kind of touch on in this is that besides reviewing code, we also have been expanding our use of using these tools to build observability tools. So, like, we're a Datadog shop here, and they've got an MCP, and we've been pretty extensively starting to build these skills out that look for things like false positive monitors. So, like, each week it runs and looks at the monitors that fired last week, and it looks to see, did they self-resolve quickly? Did they fire a lot? And we have like a whole scoring system. And so we can do this. Even actually today, one of the folks was automating this to run each morning at 6 a.m. so that when they come in, if they're primary, they can look at the output of that to see, are there things that I need to look at, besides my other tasks. And so it kind of frees up time, but it also, makes sure that stuff gets looked at. So, and some things might be legit that get, scored themselves as a false positive, but that's okay. They'll review it and they'll discard it if it's not a problem. But if it is a problem, it also gives us recommendations for how they might fix that monitor.
Yeah, it's reducing the toil and the work to get from A to Z. If we can focus on that part of the job we like, why not do that?
One of the tools I'm using is RubberDuck on Copilot, which considers its own plan, like there's an orchestrator, it spins up some agents that create its own plan, and later on some results. Have you been utilizing that? Do you have any comments on that or suggestions on how to test these plans?
Yeah, if I understood you correctly, like, are we using like the plan mode? You said RubberDuck?
Yeah, RubberDuck.
I haven't used that particular one, but like we use similar approaches where we have like a plan mode, and we generally within our team, before we have it implement anything, we have it generate a plan that we can review, like a checklist plan. And one of the things that's gotten popular on the team is to do more of a like incremental implementation. So rather than telling it to just go do everything, implement one piece at a time, and you can review, because it's a lot easier to digest what it does if you do a small chunk at a time versus the entire thing. So, but yeah, there's like a meta skill, if you will, that's like it uses other skills and stuff that we've been working on as well for like a standard story, and it's similar to that, but it starts to bake in more of our our team. It's the best way to put it. It's like the different tasks that we need to do as part of the story. So things like feature flag reviews and things like that. So just to make sure, like, is there a feature flag that's necessary for this story?
I was interested in your parent feedback. It's come up on Retro yesterday, this morning, as we were talking about what we were doing. And this is probably kind of an internal discussion, but I'd be interested if there was, would be Dojo engineering effectiveness guidance, like we want revision to the pairing sensible defaults include AI.
We still pair them, we still follow the sensible defaults. We've just changed a few ways. Because the other thing I'll bring up is pairing is that there's no like, you must pair a certain way out there. So it's more about the spirit of working together and having multiple eyes on a team always.
Yeah, our conversations were like, what's the right way to do this?
Yeah.
Not, should we not?
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
the AI interactions are so like one-on-one focused. How do you do two-on-one? You know, it's kind of weird. So,
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's also psychological safety discussion, right? Of everyone's different, everyone has their own social batteries and spoons in a drawer, but they have the cement. So, what's the best way to make sure that every engineer is working in the way that's most comfortable to them and most effective? We're going to take one last question over here.
How are you assuring the quality of the work that's coming out of the AI?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is looping back into the reviewer, having it review it and making sure that we're making decisions and thinking critically about the code, and also making sure that we're doing it in small chunks. Because a lot of times when I have lost the lead with AI has been, I asked it to generate code, it generated 14 pages of code, and I'm not gonna read 14 pages. Even if I say I am, I'm just gonna glaze through a lot of those. Same issue with PRs, right? If you're working with another engineer, how do you verify the quality of their code? You do it through automated tests and documenting what it is you want to do inside of your code base into your code base, so that if it fails, your business criteria is still accounted for. It's still, your site's not going down. Or if
Follow on to that. You mentioned earlier that you were having the AI generate your tests. So, how are you assuring that the tests that you're using are quality tests that are going to detect problems with your code?
So I think from that perspective, that's where having the planning mode comes in handy, and I think it's how you utilize the planning mode is a big part of it, because part of that should include like what test cases it's generating, and you ultimately know as an engineer, and you're still responsible for what code you commit as well. And so part of this is figuring out how do you blend the engineer into that process, and how do you make sure that we're reviewing the code in a way that we, kind of to Ben's point, it's how can we generate it, how can we plan the story out in a way that we know we're getting good test coverage and the test cases we're generating are the right ones, and then the code that it generates that we can actually digest and comprehend. Because like one of the reasons that we like the more incremental code generation as a team is that, as anybody knows, once a PR gets to a certain size, as an engineer, you can't really do it in a proper review. Like in GitHub, one of my previous companies, we had a rule that once it got beyond, I forget what the threshold was. I think it was 250 lines or 200 lines. They had to do the review live during stand-up the next day, to do a walkthrough. Because as a reviewer, I can't realistically give a quality review if it's too big. So that's how we approach it. Trying to make sure that those test cases are in the plan.
Yeah, there was a book we read as part of a sharing book club that I really enjoyed called Co-Intelligence, and they really hit on the topic of you always want to keep the human in the loop when you're working with anything, right? You always want to make sure that you're making decisions with Copilot. They're not the pilot, you're the pilot. You're making final decisions, it's your responsibility. So make sure you're interacting with it. And I think on the topic of tests, just because it's writing a test doesn't mean that you're not testing them, right? Doesn't mean that you're not going in and making sure that those tests pass and fail when they shouldn't pass or fail. Or that they're not starting at a failing test and then turning into a passing test. Because ultimately those tests, even if you're writing them for your specific commit, those live inside of your code base as part of your definition of done, as part of your documentation that this is what this code should do when I leave the company or when I leave the team to move on to another team, right? So if I'm not in the room, if I'm not able to answer a question about the code that I wrote when I'm not there, the test should answer that question for you. They should sit there and say, this is what this person wanted to do with the code that they wrote.
The other part of this is, the thing, at least for me, I gotta feel like I want to speak to myself on this, is the thing that motivates me to make sure that I know what's there is I don't want to get called in the middle of the night because I committed something that broke the system. So confidence in what it's generating, then I'm not going to check it. So,
Yeah, great questions all around.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for doing this.